Hi, this is Midwife Nell coming to you from Midcoast, Maine, and I have as my guest today Susan Rachel Condon, certified midwife, who is from New York State. Susan Rachel.
Hi. Hi, Nell. Yeah, I'm Susan Rachel Condon. I am a clinical assistant professor at SUNY Downstate's midwifery program in Brooklyn, New York. And I teach IP, all things IP, and including suturing.
Great. And today we are going to talk about what to do if you've placed a stitch and you can't find the tip of your needle, or in another situation, if the tip of your needle breaks off. So those are our primary topics for today. I'm going to let Susan Rachel get us started.
Okay, thank you, Nell. So, one of the things that prompted us to think about having this conversation is how easily overwhelmed students can become when they're first learning suturing. And they're learning so many aspects of how to suture and how to hold instruments and how to use different kinds of models. And all of the models have their limitations. And then they kind of hone those skills for a few short weeks, and then they go into their clinical sites and they come back with more questions because obviously suturing human tissue that is actively bleeding is very different from suturing a sponge in a classroom. And so I wanted to talk about this because I think it's something that can easily happen when a student midwife in a clinical site who's just learning how to suture with actual live tissue is having difficulty managing the suturing process. So we were going to talk about some ways to prevent lost needles, including uh, making a distinction between whether we're suturing the mucosa or suturing muscle. So I think we're going to start with the muscle. Does that make sense now?
That sounds great. Why don't we go there?
Great.
So when we're suturing in the muscle, um, my personal preference and what I teach is to place a stitch in one side of the muscle, pull the needle through, and reload it to place the second side of the stitch. And the reason for that is that there's a couple of different reasons. One is you can take a bigger bite of muscle because you're only doing one side at a time. The other advantage, of course, is that because you've got all your needle to do that bite, you can more easily see the tip of your needle, as opposed to trying to take both sides, and then sometimes it's very hard to see the tip of your needle. One other advantage, which is not related to needle placement per se, is that your needle never blindly crosses the midline, and your chances of catching the rectum during your stitch are remote. So that's what I like to do. Any thoughts that you have on that, Susan Rachel?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the things that when I'm teaching beginners that I really emphasize is that you have to be in control of that needle all the time. So largely you're doing that visually because you know you can't be palpating the needle because then you can hurt yourself. And so, in order to do proper technique, you want to make sure that you can visualize where it is. So I think it makes the most sense to do exactly what you're describing.
And we'll do a demonstration of it after we have our conversation. There's some limitations with Zoom, and we want to make sure that you get the best information possible. One of the tips when you are placing your stitch is to use enough pressure. Most people put the stitch through and they see the needle tip and they think, oh, I'm done. But you're not done yet. You've just placed the needle in the trajectory of the tissue that you want, and now it's time to push harder because, and still along the curve of the needle and still gentle, but to use some firm pressure, which will cause the tip of the needle to come farther out of the tissue and make it easier to grasp either with a second instrument or for it to stay where you want it while you release your needle driver and then go to pick it up from the tip side.
Right. And being careful not to crush either end of the needle itself.
Yes, that is a critical piece. Thank you so much for
Sure.
raising that.
Yeah, we don't want to weaken the actual needle structure. It has to have its integrity, otherwise it can break, and that's a whole nother situation that we're going to be talking about. Um, Also, we were talking about how to use the needle driver and to use the side of the needle kind of as a retractor. So that's another thing that you're going to demonstrate um, when we look at the model, which is important. Different techniques that you can use with the instruments that you're using to make sure that you stay in control and that there's not so much tension on the needle as it's being put in the tissue that it's going to retract into the tissue and you'll lose the tip as you're stitching.
Yes, and not so much tension on the needle that you are also going to tear the tissue itself. So you want to really be turning your wrist so that the needle follows its natural curve to come smoothly through the tissue and then exit the tissue. And one of the pieces of that that's important is how you're handling your needle holder. And that is something different. We're not talking about that so much today, but it's one of the reasons why I stress to not have your digits in the rings, because then you are limited by the rotation of your arm and shoulder
Mm.
instead of just having the ability to rotate the instrument within your hand itself. And we'll demonstrate this as we do our demos a little bit later.
You just made me think of something, which is that when something like this does occur, if you lose your needle in the tissue, I feel like it's one of those things like when you're going into a swerve in a car, your tendency is to go out of it. So in a moment like that, you have to kind of stop and take a breath and not do some of the things that might be instinctive, like to go poking around with your finger or to pull on the suture, right? So the things that might be your sort of first instinct are not the things that you want to do.
That is a great point. So if you've placed your stitch and then you go to grasp the tip and all of a sudden it retracts into the tissue and you can't see it, don't pull on your suture, please. You can hold the suture with gentle tension. If you pull hard, you may separate the suture from the needle, and then the needle is embedded in the tissue and much harder to find. Uh, the next step would be to depress the tissue with either pickups, tissue forceps, or a small clamp to expose the swaged end. So you're going to grasp the back of the needle and pull the needle back out so that then you can reload it and place your stitch again. Um, and this is worth practicing on a tissue model, such as a pork loin. Something that is the tissue is soft. Pork loin feels the most like human tissue. So if you bury it in there and you can't find it, you can practice pushing that tissue back. It's not going to be like live tissue, but you will have the experience. And these things, so problems are going to happen. They're going to happen for every single person. We all make mistakes, have errors in judgment. We want to do as many of those in simulation so that when we have a problem in the clinical setting, we have the knowledge, understanding, and skill set to correct that error that we made. And so practice this in simulation.
That's such a great point. And if a needle does break, then that's an event that has to be reported. So we should probably talk a little bit about what to do if the tip of the needle does get broken.
Yeah, so sometimes the tip of the needle, if you've grasped it too hard too many times, will snap off and get lost in the tissue. Uh, and occasionally, needles are simply defective, and you go to place a stitch and the needle breaks. No fault of your own. In either case, do not palpate for the needle because each time you push it, it will migrate and it will just get pushed farther along somewhere, but it won't follow that nice curve the way you want it to. And typically, what happens is X-ray fluoroscopy is used to identify it, and the needle has to be surgically removed under direct fluoroscopy. And if you're not familiar with fluoroscopy, it's a type of X-ray where you do it in real time and you can see moving things. Um, but if the needle breaks, you also want to pull the needle box, get the lot number, call the manufacturer, complete an incident report or whatever kind of report is used in your facility, Sentinel event report. Um, and I would talk with the providers in the practice site where you are and say, have you ever had a needle break? And what do you do? Because there can always be more than one way to do things, and your curiosity can get you some new information. Um, it's a rare occurrence that needles break, but they do, and you have to be prepared. Again, this is the kind of thing where if you're in simulation and you've used up all your suture, but you've got a needle left, you can manipulate it with two instruments until the tip is ready to break, put it into your tissue model until it breaks off, and then see how hard it is to find. It really will be difficult, but with a tissue model, you can finally cut it open and figure out where it migrated to. The other thing about not palpating for the needle is we don't want a needle stick injury. All that does is contaminate you and the client with your blood. And so we really want to just stop and hold and go, yeah, we got to take care of this first, and everything else has to wait.
They are very sharp. So it's very easy to stick yourself.
It is. It is. And some of my experience comes from years of working in the operating room where sometimes we are working in deep spaces and with all kinds of different tissues. And, a needle will not come all the way through the way we expected. Um, and nobody gets upset about it. You just figure out how to expose the tip and pull it through, or if you cannot do that, how to find the swaged end and then back it out so you can place the stitch again. So that you want to be calm and peaceful and methodical. And even if the needle tip were to break off or the needle were to break somewhere else, not necessarily in the tip, if you're using a needle that's too light, um, often they will bend when you're placing a muscle stitch. And people see that in simulation when they're working with beef tongues, because beef tongue is so tough, that the needles that we typically use for vaginal repair will often bend. And the places that those bend are where it's very weak and it is likely to break. But in any case, don't panic. Take a breath, think about what we talked about, what you need to do, and then carry on with next steps.
Great.
Anything else before we move to our simulation?
I don't think so. I think it's time to play with our models.
Okay, so I am going to go ahead and change my camera over to my workstation. And I'm going to have you, if you don't mind, Susan, tell me what you want me to demonstrate so that I know what I'm going to be doing. And I'll be focusing on the model, and you can focus on what we talk about.
All right, excellent. So we're going to want to look at stitches placed both in the muscle and in the mucosa. So why don't you identify those structures on your model?
Okay, so on this model, here's the vaginal mucosa. This is the tear. And then here is the muscle. So this is a big wide tear. And these are the ones where it's really easy to lose your suture. So I'm going to just start by demonstrating. Let me get my hand out of the way. Uh, when I go pick up, and I'm not going to do an anchor stitch just for our demo purposes, but obviously I would in real life. I'm going to get one side and then the other and see how I pull my needle. So I've got a lot of needle. Obviously, tissue is not quite as compressible as this fabric, but within the vagina, it really is. And then I can let go and grasp and pull my needle all the way through. And again, for purposes of our demonstration, I'm not going to actually place these stitches. All right, so if I wanted to take a bigger bite, I'm going to come back here. I'm just going to do that again. Get one side. I need to get the wound so I can see it. I'm going to get the other side. You can see I'm really reaching to get that second side. But once I get it, if I push with my needle, I can bring a lot of my needle out, and then I can grasp it. If I were not able to grasp it, I could use either tissue forceps or a small curved clamp. to pull that through, usually not necessary in the vaginal mucosa. When we go to the muscle, here I'm going to put the bulbocavernosus together. I want to take a nice big stitch. And again, this is fabric, but if this was real tissue, I would be stopping right about here. And you can see the needle tip right here, just barely showing. If I push harder, I can get more needle tip out. If I were to,
I think sometimes people are reluctant to push that hard, but you're showing why it's necessary.
yes, and if I were to try and do both sides, when I go to do the second side, I don't have a lot of needle left. And when I have muscle tissue that's thick, it's going to be very hard for me to have enough needle show to be able to grasp it. So when I let go, you can see my needle just retracted. So now I need to figure this out. I can do half of it. That works. I'm going to reload. And now I'll do the other half. So I like to do one side, reload, then the other half, and then pull the stitch through. And here we have our stitch. Okay, I'm going to do that again and show you some other options here. What are the options, Susan Rachel?
Okay, so one option, and I'm just going to point out that you're doing this without being very handsy and you're not doing a lot of touching. And now you're going to show how to use the needle as a retractor for the second side.
Okay, so I'm going to reload because one of the things that people are like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get there. But with the back of the needle, this curve, I can push this side open, and that will actually help me figure out where to place my stitch. Now that's not so visible on this model, but when we move to our foam model, I'll demonstrate it again. If I am reluctant to let go of this needle, I'm going to use my tissue forceps here. Hold it, pull it through, and then reload it. All right. So you can use your tissue forceps, or we'll do one more. So I'm going to take a big stitch. I'm going to try and do it all the way across. Not that that's what I would like to do, but I'm doing it for a demo. It's just barely there. And I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. Now, two disadvantages to this. First of all, you can see I'm torquing these tissues on the right-hand side as I try and get this second stitch. The needle doesn't come through as much because I've got all of this tissue on my needle. So I'm going to use it either my tissue forceps or a small clamp. Without clamping down, I'm just going to use it enough to pull the needle through following its curve so I can then reload it. All right, what's next, Susan Rachel?
Well, we're also going to mention that as you start to become more proficient with doing these techniques, it becomes easier. It just starts to make sense with your muscle memory. Okay, so can you show what would happen if you did pull on the suture?
So I'm going to use a littler needle. So if your needle is too small, here I can barely get, I can hardly get the stitch I want on one side. So I certainly couldn't get the stitch on both. But if I lose the tip of my needle and I pull on the suture, I could theoretically pull the suture right out of that swaged end. So what I want to do is apply gentle tension. I'm going to press on the tissue to expose the swaged end and then grasp the swaged end. See if I can get that to work. There we go. And back it out. And I will demonstrate this again on our foam model because I think it'll be a little bit more obvious there. One of the things I just wanted to talk about is the size of your needle. So this is a small SH needle, whereas the other needle I was using was a CT1. So your choice of needle for muscle stitches is going to be very important because with a needle this small, you're not going to be able to get a good bite of the muscle. So the most common needle for the muscle stitch is going to be the CT1. It's a little bit awkward to use in the vagina because it is bigger, but it will give you a better muscle bite. And I'm going to switch models now for a second. So bear with me, please. There, we'll pop that one in the back.
And that SH needle is the one that's more likely to bend as well.
Yes, yes. The CT needle is a heavier wire. So remember, the needle is about the needle and the suture is about the suture. So if you have a 3/0 suture, you could have it on an SH needle, you could have it on a CT1 needle, you could have it on a CT2 needle, you could have it on a CT needle. So if you're not familiar with what those needles look like, go to the suture cabinet where you work or practice or are learning and find out what's available in there. What suture needle combinations are there? And we're going to talk more about sutures and needles in another talk. So we're not going to cover it in depth right now. But here's a model just to give us a little better demonstration of, let me find my little needle here. We're going to do two different demos here. First one's going to be how to get your needle out if you lose it. So here's my first side, placing my first stitch. I let go and I go, it's bleeding and I can't find the tip of my needle and I can't grasp it. So I'm going to take, and my preference is for my small clamp, preferably curved, and I'm going to put the curve on the back. I'm not going to grasp the suture with it. I'm going to keep it open and put gentle tension and then push back. See how my left hand is staying still and my right hand is pushing until it exposes that swaged end, and I can pull the needle right out. And then I'll reload it and try that stitch again. And this is the place where Susan Rachel was talking about the more you get experience, the more you're going to have a feel for how big of a bite you can take. And you may not in the future need to use those instruments, but if you need to use them when you're getting started, by all means, make your life as easy as possible. You want to set yourself up for success. All right. And now I'm going to do that same stitch with a bigger needle, and you can see how much easier it is because I've got all this needle showing. And I'm going to reload. And I'm going to go to do the other side, and this is where I'm going to use that retractor so that I want to go directly across from where my stitch came out. So I'm going to get directly across, and then I'm going to come, just looking to make sure that I'm matching. And there we have it. There's the stitch directly across. You can see it's directly across right there, and that these two are directly across from each other. I'll just show you by crossing them. You can see they match right up. So using the back of the needle to expose the tissue is very, very helpful in terms of providing you with optimal stitch placement.
I think sometimes beginners think that it's better to use a small needle, so I think that's a really important demonstration and justification for using a larger one, because you have a much better opportunity of being able to keep it in your visual field and also to stay in control of it, which is the most important thing.
I agree with you 100%. I think what I hear from learners is that they don't feel like they're in control of everything. And the biggest thing is to train your hands to be able to use the instruments like you would a knife and fork. When you are eating, you are focused on the food, the conversation, but you're not focused on how you handle those instruments. So every midwife should have their own instrument set and use them until it becomes second nature, that they can pick them up in the dark. They know what the instruments are, their hands know how to use them, and they don't have to think about it. And then you'll be able to focus on how you place the stitch. And all that's going to happen kind of simultaneously. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but you keep moving forward incrementally.
Great. I think we covered everything.
Covered everything I wanted to, but if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the comments section and we will respond to you. That's all for today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.